Ladies and gentlemen, hello, welcome back. It's another episode of Professor Drew's Lab. Let's tackle some of these questions. Let's get right into it. Starting us off, we got D-Swag 2014. Hello again, D-Swag. Think you and the group should be commended for how much thought you've put into how the episodes are produced and the ways everyone, including the viewers, are accommodated. I know you've started up on making the Pokemon at the end, but how would you go about making fill-in-the-blank item? Mostly wondering about how you would make or run an Evilite, Assault Vest, Air Balloon, or the likes. Or would you just use or not use them as you come up with ideas for how they would work? I'm so glad you asked D-Swag, and also, thank you so much for the compliments. So, let me just show you the three that you mentioned, and that'll kind of open the doors of how and why I design items the way that I do. They are not something that I started the campaign with any intention of really using, because I didn't know a lot of them or understand them. I was going to use the evolution stones as a catalyst and then kind of ignore everything else. But then I realized those are my magic items. So why wouldn't I use them? Why shouldn't I keep it? Shout out to Bilbo Baggins. So let's talk about Evilite. So Evilite, simpler the better. For those of you that don't know in the games, if you have an Evilite and you give it to a Pokemon that can evolve, it gets a crazy bonus to its defensive stats. I would kind of do the same thing in D&D. If the holder has a remaining evolution, give it a +1 to its AC. Nice and simple, super easy, not very complicated, quick to remember, easy to jot down. The bonus isn't gonna break the bank, it's not gonna ruin anything, nobody's gonna feel like they're missing out for not having one. The Assault Vest prevents you from using any kind of like status moves, some specialty moves, but like super hikes up your special defense or something similar. I would kind of keep it the same. You can't use any move that would give somebody a status, and if your attacks could do that, they no longer can. And it would suppress your abilities if they could give you the ability to like burn or poison your opponent. The attacks no longer could. So like Poison Jab would lose the ability to poison somebody. And your speed would drop by 10 feet. But it would boost your AC by 3 up to a maximum of 20 because we don't want... Obviously there are ways to break a lot of items in the games, but usually my upper limit for things is like an AC of 20 on the player's side, because if you have that, you're never going to use anything else. And in order to hit something with an AC of 20, you either have to be completely unfair to everybody else on the teams, or just kind of single them out with a bunch of saving throw stuff. And I like combat to feel a little bit punchier than that. So capping them at a maximum of 20, dropping their speed. The reason this is so much better than Eviolite is because the downsides are a lot worse. But if you're a Pokemon that doesn't have any kind of status condition you can afflict anyway, it's an objective great thing for you. And the Air Balloon. Air Balloon, I've made this very, very simple. It grants the holder immunity to ground damage and difficult terrain until the balloon is struck by an attack. Their speed is reduced to 10 feet of hovering while using the item, which means something has to push or pull you because you are floating on a balloon. And the balloon's AC is 5 and it has 1 hit point. So you would be immune to ground damage until something pops the balloon and you fall back onto the ground. So that's kind of how I would handle those items. But I do now have a whole huge list of a bunch of Pokemon items because I kept telling the players what things would do, and then we would all forget, and I'd have to either go back 30 sessions and listen to what I told them or come up with something new on the spot, so I finally just wrote everything down. Best advice I can give you as a DM is just write down the stuff that you say, because your players are going to hold it against you. They're going to say, hey, what was this thing that you said I could do? Take notes. It's important. All right. Moving on down, D-Swag, you have yet more amazing compliments, and I appreciate you in another question, so let's jump on into that. It's awesome hearing DM advice from someone who is such an awesome DM. Thank you. After making the stat blocks for a Pokemon, how do you decide on their personality before they get caught? Is it more based around the abilities and how you think they would affect that Pokemon, or more based on what you think the players would like, or is it something completely different? So if you like the illusion and the mystery of how Pokemon personalities come to be, skip ahead a few seconds here. It's all done ad-lib in the moment. So I don't put a ton of thought into wild encounter Pokemon personalities. It's just what would feel right in the moment. So everything from Sage suddenly having buck teeth to Nipsey being like this horrible nightmare crab that lives on the walls, all of that just felt like that's what they would be like when the players ran into them. Very little personality-wise is done before the players are caught to entice them. There are exceptions, like Wimpimble was meant to be just a Meowth that does magic tricks and kind of appears at different points in the region. Similar to like Wymond Coover. But the players liked him so much that they caught him, and now he just hangs out with the tots. So a lot of the personality stuff at first is just improv, which is a lot of how I do my DM style. Try not to lock anything down beforehand just in case. And then whatever the players like about them, when they catch them, I start to hand the reins off and let them kind of decide how their team would react to something. Once they get a feel for what the creature would behave like, I have no problem if they want to make a couple changes as they go, because as the trainer, I feel like you should have some degree and some say in how your Pokemon see the world. But thank you for your questions, D-Swag, and thank you for your compliments. I appreciate both of them. Let's move on down. Blue Creeper, you have a whole bunch of questions, so let's tackle them one at a time, shall we? What/who is Lord Ridgemont? If that has been established, please ignore. It kind of has, but it also kind of hasn't, but I won't ignore this. Let's tackle it right here, right now. Lord Ridgemont is filling in the role of a warlock patron from my usual lineup, my cadre of immortal beings. He is currently completely in the hold of the man who is playing him. So I came up with Lord Ridgemont as a character, and it fits very neatly with how Troy, aka my father, plays D&D when he plays. He likes that immortal watchdog that makes sure everything is in balance. If you need more clarification on that, if you've watched Ragnarok, Refusul is literally his ideal D&D character. Now I need to say again, because this tends to get missed sometimes, Refusul and Lord Ridgemont are not the same person, they are just played by the same person. But it's a character that I knew he would like because their ideals line up. But yeah, Lord Ridgemont is basically just a warlock patron. He lives in a realm between realms. So if you were to jump from like the prime material plane in 5th edition to like the Feywild, Lord Ridgemont would be in the middle. He would be in that gateway that you're walking through. Most of the time he's not going to mess with you. But if you get stuck in a gateway between worlds, you show up at his doorstep, and he figures out where you're supposed to be. And he sends you on your way, but he's also kind of an archfey. So sometimes he throws a party for you and keeps you there for a few hundred years before he sends you on your way. He's a little chaotic in that sense. But he works very closely with the Dreamcatcher, which is the spooky, horrible, creepy spider that also lives in that plane. And we kind of got to see a little bit of that thing. I don't know that we'll see too much more of the Dreamcatcher in the TOTS game because that is so just traditional D&D. It doesn't really fit. It doesn't really like vibe with the Pokemon theme, so we probably won't see that thing again. But it kind of matched up because we filmed that around Halloween time, so it was kind of fitting to have a little bit of a spooky session. So I brought those guys in. Because it felt like they would fit. But basically, they're both warlock patrons that I thought would work really well for Ridgemont Manor and that kind of story arc. The names are different for this, but the Dreamcatcher is identical. Lord Ridgemont's name is not usually Lord Ridgemont, it's usually Balathmog. But that's neither here nor there. Let's move on down. I've rambled long enough. Are the Legendaries even actually alive, and do they have free will? Yes, absolutely. They are extra-dimensional beings that exist of their own accord, but belief in them gives them strength and power. So it's a very, I wish I could remember who told me. I will have to go back and I will have to put your name in the comments here because somebody finally reminded me it is an idea known as Tulpas. And I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, might be Tulpas. But it's the belief in a being gives form to that being. So if you believe so hard that something exists, it will manifest evidence of its existence to you. That is to say, things like the Rainmaker also exist in a kind of extra-dimensional space. They are not a three-dimensional being. They are not just running around the Laris region all the time, but sometimes they slip through and they bleed into the world, and it causes things like massive flooding. And it causes things like incredible blizzards to just flow into the world. They are alive. They do have free will, but the intention and why they are framed in that way is that a mortal cannot meaningfully interact with them, and they cannot be captured, which I've gone on ad nauseum probably like 5 or 6 dozen times. So I won't kind of beat that idea again. But that's basically that's the long and short of it. What is your favorite Pokemon or Pokemon type if it's Wooper? It is absolutely Wooper. And honestly, as far as like favorite typing goes, I really don't know. It's probably Grass, because I tend to like a lot of the Grass type Pokemon. I like a lot of designs for Ghost and Water types as well. But honestly, I really don't know. It's hard to say because I like Wooper so much more than all of the other Pokemon that it's kind of hard to pick like a favorite typing. But in terms of like application of typing, it's probably I love the dualities with like Ghost, Normal, and Fighting where they can't hit each other. I really like that. So it's probably Ghost, but I really don't know. It's a good question. Let's move on down. Can a Pokemon species, like say Spinarak, have multiple regional variants per region? Absolutely. We've seen 4 variants of the Ekans line, probably 3 to 5 Geodude variants, and a few, probably, I want to say 3, no fewer than 3 Spinaraks. And a lot of you might be saying, how come you don't just diversify? And a lot of it is we started the game with just Gen 1 and 2. So I had kind of designed myself into a box. I have since designed my way out of that box. But there were times early on where there were better fits than like an Ekans, where like a Seviper would have fit better. Instead of the massive purple Ekans that basically just did more poison damage, like a Seviper would have been a cooler fit. But a lot of that was me just kind of thinking on the fly and not remembering newer Pokemon. But that's on me. But absolutely, each variant can be unique. It can be a more local adaptation. I love the idea of like specific mutations. The example I always use is like if you took ferrets and put them in the wild, who's to say they wouldn't evolve like longer claws for getting bugs out of trees, or like sharper hooked claws for climbing, similar to like a sloth. Some might use tools and therefore get like thumbs. I love that kind of thought process. It's very inspirational, and that's why we see a lot of variants these days. But thank you for your questions, Blue Creeper. Stay cool. Let's move on down. Okashi Ad. We have seen Sage use Grassy Terrain, but how would you make Misty, Electric, and Psychic Terrain work? Haha, I'm glad you asked, because it's never come up, and honestly, it probably should at some point, because I have designs for all of these, but have really never deployed them, and Sage's Grassy Terrain is different from my normal ruling of Grassy Terrain. But all of them in one way or another involve like creatures on the ground gain an effect. So like Electric Terrain keeps Pokemon from falling asleep on the ground. I would just have it be like an area of effect similar to Sage's Grassy Terrain, but Electric types deal additional damage, and Pokemon can't be drowsy or asleep. And if they are, they wake up. Keep it nice and simple. Whether or not it would do like damage to water types or something, that would be a whole other conversation for balancing. A lot of these are just kind of general design choices that I've made in recent weeks. Grassy Terrain I now have as all creatures on the ground regain Constitution modifier and hit points at the start of each turn, rather than like a set amount of dice that one player is rolling for everybody. I would just have everybody keep track of it themselves if they're on the ground. Grass types deal more damage, ground types deal less, because that's like a weird little bit of rules text hidden in the Grassy Terrain stuff. Misty Terrain, dragons do less damage. And Pokemon on the ground cannot get or have negative status conditions, which is a fancy way of saying you can't be poisoned, you can't become confused, all that kind of stuff. And Psychic Terrain would buff Psychic Pokemon damage and prevent Pokemon on the ground from taking opportunity attacks, which is something I have moved away from anyway. is preventing Pokemon from taking opportunity attacks, because it makes combat so boring if everyone's afraid to move because you're just gonna get hit all the time. But yeah, that's kind of how I would handle the terrains. I've designed and redesigned everything for the TOTS game, and it will continue to get redesigned in the future, but right now that's kind of where my headspace is at. Pokemon on the ground are affected in these ways. Moving on down, have you ever considered giving a Pokemon a different ability they don't normally have because it would fit better for them? It happens a lot. Most of the TOTS either have a homebrew or hybrid ability that they couldn't normally have or shouldn't have, or they have both abilities that they should have, because it's a Pokemon setting and there's not a lot of ways to give incremental upgrades to the Pokemon without giving them extra hit points or buffing their stats. There's not a whole lot of ways to do it, but the abilities really change how the Pokemon play, and it keeps things exciting and more dynamic. So absolutely, it happens all the time. Moving on down. Reptile Xeno, you have a lot of very hard-hitting questions, so I'm gonna read through this whole thing, and then we're gonna tackle it bit by bit, but it's a phenomenal question. From what I've seen, ghost Pokemon have different levels of self-awareness. From Desmond and the Ghastly, the TOTS men on their way back from Xantha being aware, but seemingly helpful. But others only seeming to serve like mindless drones. This leads to me wondering how D's new Mischievous lines in all of this, as how you voice them is more robotic and logical, along with how they seemingly sent that message to CJ when they first met. Could this Mischievous fall in the lines of a more intelligent servant, not aware that they are serving the purpose, or is it more certain entities can use any ghost Pokemon for things they want without that Pokemon's permission? Also, why do only some ghost Pokemon have personalities and identities while others only seem to be followers of something else? For example, the Ghastlies that help cause. Or is it more some choose to be servants and not to think? There's a lot. There's a lot to unpack, so let's do it piece by piece. So each ghost is fundamentally different from every other ghost. We'll start there. And it has a lot to do with the manner in which they are created. A lot of the times when you see a Ghastly, it is a representation of necromancy in the Pokemon setting. So it's somebody pulling a soul from that ghost realm with a TOTS font Kaya, ripping them out of there, and using them to fight. So when they are bound in the world as a Ghastly in that way, when they're defeated, they go right back to that realm and they're gone. And while they're there, they don't really have full control, but anybody that has true sight or can see through those illusions will see the person that they're fighting. So CJ's had that a couple times. The goggles that came from the Steel Haxorus are able to kind of see in that way. So that's why some of those ghosts just feel very out of place. That's what you're seeing. You're seeing necromancy in the Pokemon DnD setting. But I have to kind of flavor it in a more Pokemon way than just, oh, here's a skeleton to fight you, which we have done as well, and that was very fun. Should probably have done that more, who knows. D's Mischievous is a mystery that I don't want to really give away because we haven't really had a ton of opportunities to explore that just yet. So I won't say anything about Mischievous. As for the mindless drones deal, it's also very similar to Lord Ridgemont. When you catch those lost souls, if you keep them too long, they start to forget who they are, and they lose their shape, they lose their form, they become Shuppets and Bannets and Duskulls and Ghastlies and all kinds of things in between. And if you're lost long enough and you're wandering, yeah, you might just become a mindless drone, and those guys might enlist with one side or the other. They might just pass into obscurity. They might disappear. They might try to interact with humans. It really just depends on the ghost. So that hopefully kind of clears things up, but all you need to know is the Gravetender is capable of communicating with anybody through any ghost, regardless of what they want or intend for themselves. So the Gravetender is able to basically override your big consciousness and just speak through you, kind of like a puppet master. But hopefully that kind of clears things up with that little extra bit at the end there. But great question, thank you. Okay, let's roll on down. Izuku Midoriya. You keep mentioning player abilities, but what will these abilities be? Are they going to be downtime things, or can some of the abilities be used in combat? So I'm not going to give away the surprises. but the player characters will function much closer to a traditional adventurer than they do now. Right now, they're just kids, and they have a couple abilities that they can kind of do sometimes. They're gonna function like a player character should have from the beginning. That's the kind of stuff that we'll be seeing. But I'm not gonna give away any specifics, because where's the fun in that? But stay tuned. It's gonna be cool. I hope. Hopefully you guys will like it. But let's move on down. Eevee Key. I have a question. I've been watching other Pokemon DnD on Spotify, and from what I know, Pokemon 5e has been taken down. How do you still play? Did you change some stuff? So I'm gonna speak very carefully here. We have never used any components, rules, or features from that system. Everything that we have used has either been homebrewed or is just D&D 5th edition rules as written anywhere that we can. So we are just playing D&D, and then anything that doesn't fit or needs some editing for the setting that we're playing in is all homebrew. That was a big thing for us from the very beginning, from day one. I wanted to make sure that there was no backseating of the players, and the best way I could think of to do that is make sure that we weren't using a rule set that anybody had access to. And the quickest way to do that was to make it all from scratch. And I didn't know that P5e existed until we were on session like 30. And yeah, so basically, for anybody curious of how we're able to keep going, we have no association with that rule set. It's all homebrew. Everything's built from scratch. And speaking of being built from scratch, I promised some patrons that for our next build a Pokemon, we would build a bug, and that it would be a variant Spinarak, specifically the Scarab Spinnarak. So I don't have a Scarab Ariados because I have a question for you guys, and it's how would you take what I'm about to show you and make it an Ariados or an Ariados, however you want to call it. So welcome to Build a Bug Workshop. Let's take a look here. The Scarab Spinnaraks, as featured in the Return to Xantha episodes with the formerly Man Bun Boys, are grounded bug type. They drop the poison for a ground ability. Speaking of abilities, they have Sandwalker, which is something that I made up for them. This creature is unaffected by extreme heat or difficult terrain and has advantage on stealth checks made in sand. It is immune to any effect that would cause extra damage to it while burrowing. Now you might say, well, hey, what the heck does that mean? A lot of the rules that I've written for how damage works is if you're a Pokemon with a burrow speed and you stay underground for too long, you start to be crushed. You take force damage, unless you have an ability like this. Now, add into that if you are caught in a move like Earthquake. If you're burrowed and you fail your save, you automatically take the maximum possible damage because you're underground. You're getting crushed and compressed and things are moving. You might get restrained or grappled. But if you're this Scarab Spinnarak and you have Sandwalker as your ability, you don't take any damage if you're underground. If you're in sand, if you're in like soil, nothing doing. But these guys are they're kind of like the Fremen. They're really good out in the sand, out in the desert. This was around the time I started reading Dune. Was when these guys came out. So hopefully that kind of clears things up a little bit. As for the moveset, I gave them a lot of pretty bog standard stuff. They have Dig. They can move up to their burrow speed as part of the attack. On a hit, the target must succeed a Constitution save or become paralyzed until the end of your next turn, and they take a bunch of ground damage. So it's kind of like a poisonous dig, or I guess venomous dig is a better way to say that. But the venom is not damaging; it's more paralytic. So kind of like Shelob. Bulldoze. Here's a bulldoze. All creatures within 15 feet of you that are on the ground type Pokemon are immune to this attack. Must succeed a DC 13 dexterity save or suffer 2d6 ground damage. Now, if you were burrowed underground and didn't have Sandwalker, you would take 12 if you fail your save. Leech Life, 2d6 bug damage. You regain half the damage dealt as hit points. And here's the fun move is Sandweb. Ooh. Choose a 5-foot radius area within 20 feet of you that is on the ground. That area becomes difficult terrain, and any creature that ends its turn in the area or starts its turn there must succeed a DC 13 strength saving throw or become restrained. So that's the way that these little Scarab Spinnaraks hunt. They make a massive web with all of their sand web, and then they just kind of burrow and wait. They're kind of like any burrowing spider, which is like a nightmare fuel. But you know that I use the things I'm creeped out by and freaked out about in design, because it's a good way to kind of familiarize yourself with nature, because nature does some creepy things sometimes. But let's jump on down to stats. Let's get into the meat of the issue. They've got an AC of 15 and an HP of 20. Now you might be saying, hey, that's kind of high AC and kind of low HP for a bug. But the intention is these guys are a swarm. They're a swarming creature, so each one is like smaller than tiny. But when they all jump on you together, and there's 30 or 40 of them, and you're all of them are attacking, that's the culmination of that 1d10 ground damage. When they all work together, that's the 2d6 ground damage bulldoze. All those bites and siphons, they're kind of like ticks out in the desert, and they can steal your HP, and then they all work together. So pretty much what we saw in that Xanth episode was probably only like 2 or 3 of these swarms of Spinaraks, just in case. But yeah, I love the swarm mechanic. I think it's really cool. But jumping on down from there, the stats are nothing really to write home about. There's nothing too crazy. A strength of 13, a dex of 15, constitution of 15, an intelligence of 6, a wisdom of 14, and a charisma of 12. Charisma is the infinite bane of my design existence. I never know if something should get high charisma just because it's creepy as a bug, or the opposite, if it should have like a 3 charisma because it's a bug and people might be afraid of it. So I tend to just split the difference, and a lot of the time that means most Pokemon have like a 10 to 12 charisma. And then they get proficiency in intimidation or persuasion or something like that. But yeah, that is how I did the Scarab Spinarax. I'm curious where you guys would take it from there. So let me know in the comments below how you would build that evolutionary line. Where would you take it? Because I haven't had to so far, and I haven't. And rather than kind of like throw something together, I'm kind of curious where you guys would take this. Because I've learned from a lot of these that you guys have some great design ideas. I want to give you a chance to show off your skills. And we'll talk about a couple of them in the next one. So until then, thank y'all very much for watching. I love you very much. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!